The first thing I heard wasn't a bang or a crash. It was silence. And for a woman like Sarah, silence was the most terrifying sound in the world. "Alex? It's Sarah at Evergreen. We have an emergency, a real one." Her voice on the phone was stripped of its usual weary professionalism, scraped raw by panic. I was in my workshop, my sanctuary, meticulously cleaning the contacts on a breaker switch the size of a hardback novel. The smell of ozone and WD-40 was my incense. "Let me guess," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. It's a professional habit. "The Keurig machine is on the fritz and the nurses are about to unionize?" "The power's out," she practically shrieked, the words tumbling over each other. "The whole building, and our backup generator, it won't start. The batteries are dead. The fuel line looks cut." I put the breaker down. A cold knot formed in my stomach, the kind of knot you get right before the world goes sideways. "Cut? That doesn't just happen. Did you check the main breaker? Is the whole grid down in your area?" "No, the houses next door have power. It's just us. That woman, the HOA president. She was out here this morning with a contractor. She was screaming about some unauthorized electrical conduit we have running through a flower bed on the property line. Alex, I think she did this." The knot in my stomach tightened. Evergreen Dialysis Center. I remembered the email chain from a few months back. They'd just moved into a new commercial space that bordered a meticulously manicured residential community called Pleasant Meadows Estates. Sarah had been worried about the HOA president, a woman she'd described as a real stickler. I had given them a quote for a permanent, silent, enclosed backup generator. A proper, professional solution. The quote had been returned with a polite note from corporate. "Too expensive at this time. We will rely on the building's existing system." Famous last words. "How many patients are you treating right now, Sarah?" I asked, my voice dropping into what my ex-girlfriend used to call my disaster mode tone. 12, she choked out. "They're all hooked up. The machine batteries last for 30 minutes, tops. We're already 15 minutes in." I did the math. The cold knot turned to ice. Dialysis isn't like charging your phone. When the machine stops, it's not an inconvenience. It's a life-threatening medical event. Their blood mid-cycle is in the machine. A sudden stop can cause clotting, catastrophic blood pressure drops, a cascade of horrors I didn't want to contemplate. This wasn't about business anymore. This was the call, the one my entire, slightly unhinged professional life was built for. My company, Power on Demand, was more of a calling than a business. My philosophy was simple. The world is one idiot with a pair of bolt cutters away from chaos. I sell the extension cord. And I had a very, very big extension cord. "Sarah, listen to me," I said, already moving, my body knowing the drill before my mind had finished processing. "Keep everyone calm. Tell your staff to prepare for manual procedures if they have to. I'm on my way. How much time do you have?" "Exactly." I could hear the frantic beeping of a machine in the background. "Maybe 10, 15 minutes before the machines go dark." "I'll be there in 8. I slammed the phone down and hit a big, greasy red button on my workshop wall. A low rumble started from the driveway outside as the diesel preheater for my generator array kicked in. Most guys my age are swiping right on dating apps. Me? I'm swiping through catalogs for insulated bus bars. My therapist says it's an avoidance mechanism. I say my generator has never once told me we need to talk about our future. Point, Alex. I grabbed my go bag, a military surplus duffel stuffed with diagnostic tools, heavy-duty gloves, and a dozen different types of adapters, and sprinted out of the workshop. There she was, the beast. My rig is a gleaming black Ford F350, jacked up just enough to look serious, hitched to a custom-built 16-foot enclosed trailer. But inside that trailer wasn't a collection of lawnmowers or antique furniture. It was a 400-kilowatt diesel generator, a beast of a machine powerful enough to run a small village, nestled in sound-dampening foam. It was my magnum opus, my Sistine Chapel of self-reliance. And today, it was going to be a 12-person capacity life raft. I vaulted into the driver's seat, the leather worn and familiar. The engine roared to life with a turn of the key, a deep, throaty promise of power. The beast's low hum from the preheater was a comforting counterpoint. As I peeled out of my driveway, tires squealing just a little, my internal monologue was a chaotic symphony of fury and glee. Fury at the colossal stupidity that created this situation, and a dark, undeniable glee that my moment, the reason I owned all this ridiculously over-engineered equipment, had finally arrived. This was my Super Bowl. The 8-minute drive was a masterclass in controlled aggression. I weaved through traffic with a focus that would make a fighter pilot proud, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every red light was a personal insult. Every slow driver was an enemy of progress. My mind raced, running through schematics and protocols. Main panel access? Tie-in points? Amperage load for 12 dialysis machines plus building basics? I'd already calculated they'd need about 150 amps minimum, 200 to be safe. The beast could provide that in its sleep. As I turned onto the street leading to the center, the scene came into sharp, infuriating focus. On one side of the road, the Evergreen Dialysis Center, a clean, modern building of glass and brushed steel, now dark and ominous. On the other side, the entrance to Pleasant Meadows Estates, a monument to beige conformity, complete with a ridiculously ornate sign and an ocean of unnaturally green lawn. And standing right on the property line, like a human stop sign, was a woman. She was in her 50s, clad in a pastel pink tracksuit that screamed, "I have time for spin class and ruining your day." She held a clipboard like a scepter, her expression a terrifying blend of smug satisfaction and righteous indignation. This had to be Brenda. I swung the massive rig into the dialysis center's parking lot, the trailer groaning as I executed a perfect, multi-point turn to position it near the building's rear corner. Through the large waiting room window, I saw the faces. A daughter holding her elderly mother's hand, a young man staring blankly at his phone, the strained expressions of nurses moving with frantic purpose in the background. The air itself felt thick with anxiety. Sarah burst through the front door the moment I killed the truck's engine, her face pale. Alex, thank God. Before she could say another word, the pink tracksuit was in motion. Brenda marched across the pristine asphalt with the unyielding purpose of a Terminator. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice high and sharp. "This is a private commercial lot. You cannot park that monstrosity here." I ignored her, vaulting out of the cab and striding to the back of the trailer. "Sarah, where's your main electrical panel?" I asked, my voice tight. Sarah pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the building. "Around the back. The main feed comes in from over there, right by that hedge." "I am speaking to you." Brenda's voice was now inches from my ear. "I am Brenda Gable, president of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. You are in violation of several noise and commercial vehicle ordinances, not to mention the potential environmental impact of that machine." I finally stopped and turned to face her, letting my eyes travel from her pristine white sneakers up to her perfectly coiffed, helmet-like hair. I gave her a deadpan stare. "Hi, Brenda. I'm Alex. I'm about to violate your eardrums for about 5 minutes. I suggest you step back, unless you want to get tangled in 400 amps of I don't give a damn." Her jaw dropped. It was a satisfying, if fleeting, victory. I left her sputtering and followed Sarah to the rear of the building. There it was. The main utility box, its door slightly ajar. Next to it, running along a low concrete retaining wall, was a thick, armored conduit, or what was left of it. It had been cut clean through with what looked like industrial bolt cutters, the copper wires inside splayed out like a metallic flower. It wasn't just damaged, it was sabotaged, vandalized. "She was right here this morning," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage, screaming about how it was unaesthetic. "It's about to get a whole lot more unaesthetic," I muttered. This was the moment, the performance. I worked with a speed born of 1,000 hours of practice. I swung open the rear doors of my trailer, revealing the heart of the beast. The generator was a thing of beauty, a massive block of yellow-painted iron and steel. Beside it, coiled on massive spools, were my cables. Thick black pythons, each as thick as a man's wrist. I grabbed the ends of 2 of them and hauled them towards the electrical panel, the heavy rubber thudding on the pavement. Brenda watched, aghast, as if I were defiling her temple. "This is highly irregular. You don't have permits for this." "Lady, in about 5 minutes, the only permit I need is the one that says, 'Don't let people die,'" I grunted, wrenching open the service panel with a specialized key. The inside was a neat, orderly world of breakers and bus bars, now tragically inert. With Sarah pointing out the main lugs, I got to work. My heavy-duty gloves gave me the dexterity I needed. I clipped on my multimeter first. Dead. Not a whisper of voltage from the street. I clamped the massive jaws of my connectors onto the main bus bars, bypassing the severed conduit entirely, the connection seated with a solid, satisfying thunk. I jogged back to the trailer, my heart pounding with a strange mix of adrenaline and focus. I gave the cables a final check, ensuring a clean, safe connection. Then, I faced the control panel of the Beast. It was a simple sequence, a sequence I had practiced until it was muscle memory. First, the main fuel valve. Click. Second, the engine ignition. I turned the key. The pre-warmed diesel engine coughed once, then roared to life, a deep, earth-shaking rumble that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. It was loud, yes, but it was the sound of salvation. Third, the output breaker, a large, satisfyingly chunky lever. I braced myself and threw it. Ka-chunk. I looked up at the building. For a second, nothing. Then, a flicker. The lights in the waiting room window blinked on. A moment later, through the now open front door, we heard it. The steady, rhythmic whirring of 12 dialysis machines spinning back to life. A collective sigh of relief, so audible it seemed to ripple through the air, was followed by a smattering of applause from inside. I glanced at my watch. 2 minutes, 34 seconds from park to power. I was getting slow in my old age. My moment of triumph was short-lived. Brenda, her face the color of a ripe tomato, had her phone glued to her ear. "Yes, officer! An emergency! He's created a hazardous situation. There's a giant, unregulated engine running. Get here now!" Sure enough, sirens wailed in the distance. Round 1 was over. Round 2 was about to begin. A police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer, pulled into the lot a few minutes later, its lights flashing silently. 2 officers got out. The first was young, probably mid-20s, with a ramrod-straight posture and an expression that said he'd memorized every page of the patrolman's handbook. His name tag read Daniels. The second was older, maybe late 50s, with a weary slump to his shoulders and a face etched with the kind of tired patience that only comes from decades of dealing with the public's nonsense. His tag read Miller. "Okay, what's all this then?" Officer Daniels asked, his voice projecting an authority he was clearly still growing into. His eyes were fixed on my rig, a mixture of suspicion and grudging awe. Brenda was on him like a fly on a picnic lunch. "Officer?" Thank goodness. This man, she said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me, illegally parked this industrial vehicle, trespassed onto our common property, destroyed a utility housing, and jury-rigged this death machine to the building. Daniels turned his procedural gaze on me. Sir, I'm going to need you to turn that generator off. We need to assess the situation and secure the scene. I crossed my arms, trying to project an aura of calm I didn't entirely feel. With all due respect, officer, if I turn this off, the machines inside that are currently cleaning the blood of 12 human beings will turn off with it. So that's going to be a hard no from me. We can assess all you want with the power on. Daniels puffed up slightly, not used to being told no. Sir, you are creating an unauthorized power grid. There are codes, regulations. Sergeant Miller, who had been quietly observing, held up a hand, silencing his younger partner. He walked past Brenda, his eyes taking in the whole scene. The dark street, the brightly lit medical center, my humming generator, and the professionally coiled cables leading to the tampered-with panel. His gaze was slow, methodical. He wasn't looking at violations. He was looking for the story. "What's going on here, son?" Miller asked me, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Before I could answer, Sarah stepped forward. She had her professional composure back, a life-or-death crisis apparently being less stressful than dealing with Brenda. In a calm, clear voice, she explained everything. The morning confrontation with Brenda, the sudden power outage, the sabotaged line, the dying backup batteries, the life-threatening situation for her patients, and my timely arrival. Miller listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Sarah was finished, he walked over to the retaining wall and crouched down, examining the severed conduit. He looked at the clean, sharp cuts on the thick, armored cable. He looked at the industrial-sized bolt cutters sitting partially hidden in the mulch of the flower bed, right where the contractor must have dropped them. Then he stood up slowly and turned his gaze on Brenda. "Ma'am," he began, his voice dangerously soft. "My name is Sergeant Miller. Did you authorize someone to cut this power line?" Brenda, suddenly on the defensive, brandished her clipboard like a shield. "It was in violation. Section 14, subsection C of the Pleasant Meadows bylaws prohibits unesthetic utility conduits on shared visibility property lines. They were given a warning." Sergeant Miller let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sigh of a man who had stared into the abyss of petty human squabbles, and the abyss had sighed back. "Ma'am, this is a dialysis center, not a garden club. You can't cut power to a medical facility. That's not an HOA violation. Best case, that's criminal mischief and destruction of property. Worst case, it's reckless endangerment, a felony." Officer Daniels looked from his sergeant to the sputtering Brenda, his procedural certainty beginning to waver. "But Sergeant, the vehicle codes. He is parked in a fire lane and the generator noise levels." "Daniels," Miller cut him off, not unkindly. "We'll worry about the fire lane after we make sure no one is actively dying because of a dispute over a flower bed. You see those people in there?" He gestured with his thumb toward the clinic. "They get to stay alive today. The paperwork can wait." He turned back to me, his eyes lingering on the beast for a moment. A flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe amusement, crossed his face. "You're not going anywhere until we get this sorted out. But for now, you're fine. Keep the lights on." Brenda looked like she had just been slapped with a fish. Her primary weapon, an appeal to authority, had been turned against her. She stood there, mouth opening and closing, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. I allowed myself a small, internal smile. The immediate threat was neutralized. But I knew, with the certainty of a man who deals with chaos for a living, that the war was just getting started. The next few hours were a strange, tense limbo. Sergeant Miller had a long, quiet conversation with Brenda, after which she stomped back to her identical beige house across the street, her pink tracksuit practically vibrating with fury. Miller and Daniels took statements from Sarah and me, their questioning a study in contrasts. Daniels asked about permits, vehicle weight, and decibel levels. Miller asked about response times, patient conditions, and whether I had coffee in my truck. I did. I offered him some. He accepted. The immediate crisis was over, but Brenda was a creature of relentless, bureaucratic malice. She couldn't win with brute force, so she retreated to her own personal Ardennes forest, the HOA rulebook. An hour after the police interview wrapped up, a large, flatbed tow truck rumbled into the parking lot. The driver, a burly guy with a greasy ponytail, hopped out and started sizing up my F-350. "Got a work order to tow a commercial vehicle illegally parked in a fire lane," he announced to no one in particular. I walked over, sipping the now lukewarm coffee from my thermos. "You hook up to that truck, my friend, and you're turning off the generator that's keeping this whole building running. You'll be an accessory to whatever happens next. See that police sergeant over there?" I nodded towards Miller, who was leaning against his cruiser, watching the new development with weary resignation. "Go ask him if it's a good idea." The tow truck driver's eyes widened slightly. He looked at my rig, at the thick black cables snaking from it into the building, at the cop, and then back at me. He was a businessman, not an idiot. He held up his hands. "Nope, not touching it. I'm paid to tow cars, not get involved in whatever the hell this is." He got back in his truck and rumbled away, leaving a cloud of diesel smoke and Brenda's thwarted ambitions in his wake. I saw a curtain twitch in the window of her house. She wasn't done. Of course she wasn't. About 30 minutes later, she marched back across the street, her expression now one of cold, calculated fury. She wasn't yelling anymore. It was worse. She was holding two thick, official-looking envelopes. She slapped one into Sarah's hand and the other into mine. "Official notice from the Pleasant Meadows Architectural Review Committee," she said, her voice dripping with venomous formality. "You," she pointed at me, "are being fined $5,000 for illegal operation of industrial machinery, $2,000 for noise ordinance violations, and a further $1,000 for fluid leakage potential on common access pavement. Payable within 24 hours. She then turned to Sarah. "And your facility is being fined $10,000 for unauthorized structural modification, that being the illegal conduit, and a daily fine of $500 for ongoing aesthetic non-compliance." I looked down at the letter. It was professionally printed, citing bylaws and subsections I was sure she'd written herself. It was absurd, a work of pure weaponized pettiness, but it was also a real problem. This was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Just as I was contemplating my response, which ranged from laughing in her face to mailing her a box of Hornets, a beat-up, rust-colored Ford Econoline van rattled into the parking lot. It parked next to my gleaming rig like a mangy mutt sidling up to a prize-winning show dog. The side of the van had faded, lettering, "Malone Electrical. If it's got wires, we can fix it." The driver's side door creaked open, and out stepped a man who looked like he was carved from a block of granite and left out in the sun for 60 years. He had a shock of white hair, a face like a road map of every job site in the state, and a tool belt that looked older than I was. He squinted at the scene, his gaze sweeping over the dialysis center, Brenda, the police car, and finally, my generator. He let out a low whistle. "Holy Mother of God," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "What are you trying to do, jumpstart the moon?" Sarah's face broke into a relieved smile. "Sparky, thank you for coming so fast." "That's me," he said, ambling over. Sarah called. Said some blue-haired dragon cut her power line. His eyes found Brenda, who was still standing there, radiating smugness. Ah, found her. This was Sparky Malone, the best damn electrician in the county. A legend. Brenda, realizing she was now outnumbered by competent people, gave a huff of indignation and marched back to her beige fortress. The three of us, me, the high-tech power guru, Sarah, the frantic but determined manager, and Sparky, the old-school master of volts and amps, found ourselves in an impromptu council of war. We huddled up behind my truck, using the massive tailgate as a makeshift desk. It felt like the beginning of a heist movie. "All right," Sparky said, after I gave him the 30-second rundown. He ran a calloused hand over his chin. "Let's see the damage." He inspected the severed conduit with an expert eye, poking and prodding at the cut ends. "Yep. She hired a butcher, not a surgeon. Did this with a pair of big bolt cutters. No finesse." He looked at my setup, at the thick cables running from the beast to the panel. He followed their path, checked my connections, and nodded slowly. "Nice rig, kid," he admitted, which from Sparky was the equivalent of a knighthood. "Clean tie-in, you know your stuff. But this is a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. She'll just keep coming." "That's what we're afraid of," Sarah said, wringing her hands. "My regional manager is already panicking. He's talking about trying to transfer the patients, which is a logistical nightmare and frankly dangerous for them. We need a permanent solution, yesterday." Sparky pulled a stubby pencil from behind his ear and grabbed a greasy napkin from his pocket. He began to sketch. "Okay, option 1, we rerun the conduit. Dig a proper trench, put it in a concrete reinforced sleeve. Make it look pretty. But," he held up a finger, "the dragon over there will just find another reason to complain. It'll be the wrong shade of gray. It'll make the worms nervous. It'll block her view of the gutter across the street. With her kind, the problem is never the problem." "So what's option 2? I asked. "Option 2, Sparky said, a twinkle in his eye, "is we go around her kingdom entirely. We bypass this whole property line. The main city grid has a primary trunk line on the far side of your building, along the main road. We can do a new tap there. It means digging about 100 feet of new trench, laying some serious armored cable, and installing a new transformer. It's a big job, expensive. But," he grinned, "it's 100% Brenda-proof. She'll have zero jurisdiction." A spark of hope ignited in Sarah's eyes. "How expensive?" Sparky did some quick math in his head. "Ballpark, 25 grand. But I can have my boys out here first thing in the morning." Sarah winced at the price, but then looked at the fine notice from Brenda still clutched in her hand. "You know what? I think I can get that approved. 25 grand is a hell of a lot cheaper than the wrongful death lawsuits my corporate office is picturing right now." An alliance was forged right there in the parking lot over a greasy napkin sketch. We had a plan. We were no longer just on the defensive. We were preparing a counterattack. "Okay," I said, taking charge. "Here's the play. The new 3-pronged attack. Prong 1. Sparky, you draw up a formal proposal for the Brenda-proof option. Get your crew ready to roll at dawn. Prong 2. Sarah, you get on the phone with your corporate overlords. Don't just ask for the money. Tell them what's happening. Use words like reckless endangerment and active sabotage. Light a fire under their asses. Prong 3 is me. I'll keep the beast humming and run interference. This lady wants to play by the rules?" I looked across the street at the house where the dragon slept. "Fine. We're about to become experts in the rules." The rest of the day and into the night, the parking lot of the Evergreen Dialysis Center transformed into a rebel base camp. Sergeant Miller had finally left after getting a sworn promise from me that I wouldn't leave, and a nod of assurance from Sarah that things were, for the moment, stable. The atmosphere crackled with a new energy, Not of panic, but of purpose. It was the A-Team Suburban Warfare Edition. Prong 1, the Electrical Blitz. Sparky was a man of his word. He sat in the passenger seat of his van, the dome light illuminating his work as he drafted a detailed, professional proposal on a laptop that looked as ancient as he was. He made a few calls, his voice a low growl of commands and requests. "Yeah, Jimmy, it's Sparky. I need the mini excavator and the trenching crew. Dawn. Yeah, it's an emergency job. No, the building's not on fire, but a lady's trying to set my patients on fire. Also, call Frank at the city inspector's office. Tell him I'm buying him lunch for the next month and I need him on standby for an emergency sign-off tomorrow afternoon." By the time he was done, a plan was in motion that would have made a military planner proud. A full crew, all the necessary equipment, and a pre-greased path through the city's bureaucracy. Prong 2, the legal hammer. Sarah, emboldened by our alliance, retreated to her office. She put her phone on speaker so I could hear the magic happen. She wasn't the panicked victim anymore. She was a warrior. "No, Mr. Henderson, you don't seem to understand," she said to her regional manager, her voice like ice. "This wasn't an accident. This was a willful, malicious act by a third party that endangered the lives of 12 of our patients. I have a police report number. I have the name of the HOA president who admitted to authorizing it. Yes, reckless endangerment is the term the police sergeant used. The potential liability here is not for us, it's for them. But if we look like we are doing nothing to secure our facility, it could become our liability." There was a pause. We could practically hear Mr. Henderson's suit sweating through the phone. "I need you to get our corporate legal team on the phone right now," Sarah continued, pressing her advantage. "I want them to draft a lawsuit, a big one, naming the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association and Brenda Gable, personally, as the defendant. I want a process server out here tomorrow with a notice of intent to sue for damages, endangerment, and emotional distress. We are not asking for permission, Mr. Henderson. We are mitigating a massive ongoing risk." Another pause. Then a meek, "Yes, Sarah. Right away, Sarah." She hung up and looked at me, a fierce, triumphant glint in her eye. The sheep had learned how to roar. Prong 3, the bylaw Black Ops. My mission was the strangest of all. While the beast provided its steady, life-giving hum in the background, I sat in the cab of my F-350 with my own prize, a freshly printed 200-page copy of the Pleasant Meadows Estates HOA covenants, conditions and restrictions. Sarah had borrowed it from the welcome packet they gave the dialysis center when they moved in. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee on my truck's inverter and started reading. It was a descent into a special kind of madness, a document so profoundly petty it was almost a work of art. Internal monologue. Section 7, subsection D. All exterior trash and recycling receptacles must be of a neutral earth tone color, specifically beige, taupe, or grayish. No forest green. What kind of monster has a problem with forest green? It's the color of nature. Section 12, subsection A. Lawn ornaments, including but not limited to ceramic statuary, flamingos, or reflective gazing balls, may not exceed 18 inches in height and must be approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee. Section 19, subsection F. Holiday decorations, including string lights and inflatable figures, may not be erected more than 14 days prior to the federally recognized holiday and must be removed no more than 7 days following said holiday. Though it was a soul-crushing saga of suburban tyranny, I read for hours, highlighting anything and everything that seemed even remotely useful. And then, deep in the appendices, I found it. The mother lode. It was a copy of the original plat map filed with the county. It showed the precise property lines for the entire development. On a hunch, I pulled out my laptop, tethered it to my phone, and navigated to the county assessor's online database. I pulled up the satellite view, which had a digital overlay of the official property lines. My heart started beating faster. I zoomed in on the border between the dialysis center and Brenda's precious Pleasant Meadows. The flower bed, the retaining wall, the spot where the conduit had been cut. According to the official, legally binding county map, the property line wasn't the edge of the retaining wall. It was 6 feet beyond it. The entire flower bed, the wall, and the land where the conduit lay were not HOA common property. They belonged lock, stock, and barrel to the commercial lot. They belonged to the dialysis center. Brenda had no jurisdiction, none. It was like watching a movie where the villain who you thought was a criminal mastermind turns out to be just a guy in a cheap mask. She hadn't been enforcing her own stupid rules. She'd been ordering vandalism on someone else's property. A slow, vicious grin spread across my face. This changed everything. But I wasn't done. I needed icing for this cake of comeuppance. Just before dawn, with the sky turning a soft gray, I took a quiet stroll. My phone's camera was my weapon. I walked the silent, perfect streets of Pleasant Meadows, a ghost in Brenda's machine. And oh, the violations I found. Brenda's own house, number 14 Primrose Path, was a gold mine. Her mailbox, a stately black, was not the HOA mandated satin finish charcoal gray, Section 8, subsection F. Her prize-winning rose bushes, the pride of the neighborhood, were planted a good 4 inches too close to the public sidewalk, Section 11, subsection B. And there, peeking out from behind a perfectly trimmed azalea, was the pièce de résistance, a small, cheerful ceramic gnome holding a tiny fishing rod. He couldn't have been more than 10 inches tall, but he was a clear, unambiguous violation of the 18-inch and under committee-approved statuary rule. I took a dozen pictures of that gnome. He was my star witness. By the time Sparky's crew arrived with the sunrise, I had my ammunition. A thick stack of papers sat on my passenger seat, a certified copy of the county plat map, screenshots from the assessor's website, and 37 meticulously documented, photo-supported bylaw violations on Brenda Gable's own property, all cross-referenced with the rulebook she held so dear. The counteroffensive was ready. The morning air was filled with the sounds of progress. Sparky's crew worked like a well-oiled machine. The mini-excavator carved a neat, precise trench with surprising quietness, a world away from the brute force destruction of Brenda's contractor. They laid the heavy, armored cable with care, feeding it towards the main utility pole on the far side of the lot. It was a beautiful sight. Competence in action. Around 10 a.m., the final confrontation began. Brenda came marching out of her house, her pink tracksuit replaced by a severe-looking beige blazer. She was back in her armor. She held a new envelope, this one looking even more menacingly official than the last. It was probably a cease and desist from a lawyer she'd found in the phone book under aggressive litigators. She looked smug, confident that her paper weapons would win the day. But she wasn't met by a scattered, panicked group. She was met by a united front. I stood by my truck, arms crossed. Sarah stood by the clinic door, her expression calm and cold. Sparky stood near his crew's new handiwork, wiping grease from his hands on a rag. And, to Brenda's visible shock, Sergeant Miller's cruiser was parked quietly at the edge of the lot. He'd decided to swing by on his break to see how this plays out. He was leaning against his car, sipping a large coffee, the picture of detached amusement. "This is a final cease and desist," Brenda announced, her voice ringing with authority. "My lawyer has informed me that you are all in violation of municipal codes, and if this generator is not shut down within the hour, He will be filing for an emergency injunction." Sarah took a step forward, a picture of professional calm. "Brenda, is that for me? Because I have something for you, too." On cue, a man in a cheap suit I didn't recognize stepped out from behind Sparky's van. He walked briskly up to Brenda. "Brenda Gable?" he asked. Brenda nodded, confused. "You've been served," the man said, handing her a thick, heavy legal envelope. Brenda took it, her smug expression faltering. "What is this?" "That," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the morning air, "is a notice of intent to sue from Evergreen Health's corporate legal team, on behalf of our 12 patients, our staff, and our company, for reckless endangerment, willful destruction of property, business interruption, and infliction of emotional distress. We are seeking damages in the amount of $1.5 million. You're named personally, along with the HOA." Brenda's face went white. She stared at the papers in her hand as if they were a live snake. This is harassment. This is intimidation." Sparky, who had been enjoying the show, decided to chime in. He gestured with his greasy rag towards the newly filled trench. "By the way, Brenda, the city inspector, Frank, good guy, he just left. Signed off on our new permanent power installation. It's fully permitted, professionally installed, whisper quiet, and completely invisible from your property. We're switching over in about 10 minutes, so your whole complaint is, what's the word? Moot." Brenda was reeling, her eyes darting between us. She looked like a chess player who had just had her queen, rooks, and bishops swept from the board in a single move. She fell back on her last line of defense. "But the violations," she stammered. "The fines, the truck, the illegal gnome." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real, loud belly laugh. "Funny you should mention gnomes," I said, pushing myself off my truck. I walked over and handed her the thick, binder-clipped stack of papers I had so lovingly prepared. She took it numbly. "That," I said, pointing to the stack, "is a formal complaint I'm filing with the HOA board this afternoon. It details 37 separate bylaw violations on your own property, complete with photographic evidence and timestamps. It includes, but is not limited to, an improperly colored mailbox, non-compliant shrubbery placement, and my personal favorite, unauthorized ceramic statuary in your front garden bed." I let that sink in. Then I delivered the final blow. I also included a certified copy of the county plat map, which I've already faxed to your HOA's insurance provider. It shows you illegally ordered work on property you don't control. I believe the legal term for that is vandalism, but the insurance company might just call it a reason to drop your policy. So, you can take your fines and your cease and desist, and you can file them neatly away in whatever dark, joyless hole you crawled out of. Silence. Utter, profound silence, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the steady hum of my generator, singing its swan song. Brenda stood there, utterly broken. Her face, which had cycled through smugness, rage, and confusion, was now just empty. Defeated. The clipboard slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the pavement. She looked at the multi-million-dollar lawsuit in one hand, the thick binder of her own hypocrisy in the other, and then at Sergeant Miller, who just took a long, slow sip of his coffee and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. Without another word, she turned and walked away. It wasn't a defiant march, it was a shuffle. The walk of a tyrant whose throne had just been kicked out from under her. As she reached her front door, it opened. Her husband, Gary, a man I'd only seen as a silent shadow, stood there. He looked at the scene, at his wife's shattered expression, and did something remarkable. He placed a gentle hand on her back and guided her inside, closing the door on her ruined empire. The fight was over. We had won. An hour later, I was packing up. The dialysis center was humming along on its own new, stable, permanent power. The beast was quiet for the first time in 24 hours. Coiling the massive cables felt like a victory lap. Sarah came out, holding a check. It was for my full emergency service fee, plus a second check that had an almost comical number of zeros on it. "A hazard and heroism bonus from corporate," she said with a wide, genuine smile. They were very impressed with our proactive problem-solving. "Happy to help," I said, taking the checks. "Fighting petty tyrants is a perk of the job. Just do me a favor. Get that silent backup generator installed. The one I quoted you last month. Don't press your luck." "The order was approved an hour ago," she said, laughing. "It's already on its way." Sparky wandered over, wiping his hands. "You're a real piece of work, kid. A high-tech smartass. I like it." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Got a job downtown next month. Need to power a big crane for a few days. Might need some of that crazy mobile power of yours. I'll call you." He handed me a worn, greasy business card. It felt like a medal. The drive home was quiet. My truck cab was peaceful. I was bone-tired, running on fumes and caffeine, but I felt a deep, profound sense of satisfaction that warmed me from the inside out. My internal monologue, for once, was quiet. There was nothing left to say. I pulled up to a red light just a block away from Pleasant Meadows. As I waited, I glanced over at the neighborhood entrance. And I saw him. Gary, Brenda's husband, was on his front lawn. He had dragged out a big, round, classic Weber kettle-style charcoal grill, a model I was absolutely certain was not HOA approved. He was shaking a can of lighter fluid over a pile of briquettes, with the unbridled joy of a man just released from prison. He must have felt me looking. He looked up, across the street, and his eyes met mine through the windshield. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a nod of thanks, of shared victory. He then turned back to his grill and happily, defiantly lit a match. The light turned green. I drove away, a slow smile spreading across my face. You know, people like Brenda think they have power because they have a rule book and a title. But they don't understand what real power is. It isn't a clipboard. It's a 400-kilowatt diesel generator humming to life in the nick of time. It's a master electrician who knows the city inspector by his first name. It's a corporate lawyer with a taste for blood and a 7-figure budget. Real power is competence. It's knowing how to do things, how to fix things, how to build things. And today, competence had won, and it paid time and a half with a bonus. The world, for one brief, shining moment, was exactly as it should be.